The blizzard came down like judgment itself, thick and merciless, turning the Colorado Territory into a white wasteland where even the mountains disappeared behind walls of snow. Sarah Mitchell pulled her thin wool coat tighter around her shoulders as she trudged through knee-deep drifts, her medical bag clutched against her chest like a shield against the cold that cut through her bones like broken glass. She had been walking for 3 hours now, maybe 4. Time had lost all meaning in this frozen hell where each step forward felt like 2 steps back. The wind howled through the canyon walls with a voice that sounded almost human, almost desperate. Her lips had gone numb an hour ago, her fingers so stiff inside her threadbare gloves that she could barely feel the leather handle of her bag. The ranch, where she was needed, lay somewhere ahead in this white emptiness, a sick child burning with fever while his mother waited in terror for help that might never come. Sarah had made this promise to herself when she first came west, that no call for help would go unanswered, no matter the distance, no matter the danger. But now, as her feet slipped again on the hidden ice beneath the snow, she wondered if her determination had finally led her to her death. The cold was no longer just uncomfortable. It was predatory, stalking her with each gust of wind, each stumble that sent snow down inside her boots. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps that turned to ice crystals before they could warm the air around her face. The world had become nothing but white and wind and the terrible certainty that she was lost. She paused, trying to orient herself, squinting through the swirling snow for any landmark, any sign of the trail she had been following. But there was nothing, just endless white stretching in every direction, like a blank page waiting to be written with her final chapter. Her knees buckled slightly, the weight of exhaustion and cold pressing down on her shoulders like invisible hands. She forced herself to take another step, then another, but each movement felt slower, heavier, as if the very air had thickened into something solid. The sound came from nowhere and everywhere at once, the deep rumble of hoofbeats muffled by snow but growing closer. Sarah turned, her heart hammering against her ribs, unsure whether to hope or fear. Through the curtain of falling snow, a shape emerged, dark and massive, like something conjured from the storm itself. A horse, black as midnight, its breath steaming in great clouds, and on its back a figure wrapped in a heavy coat and wide-brimmed hat, pulled low against the wind. The rider saw her and immediately spurred his horse forward, closing the distance between them in seconds. He dismounted before the horse had fully stopped, his boots hitting the snow with a sound like distant thunder. Sarah tried to step back, tried to speak, but her voice came out as nothing more than a whisper lost in the wind. The cold had stolen her words along with everything else. "Jesus Christ," the man muttered, his voice deep and rough like gravel underfoot. "What the hell are you doing out here?" He was tall, broader through the shoulders than any man had a right to be, with hands that looked like they could break her in half without effort, but those hands moved toward her with surprising gentleness, reaching out as if to steady her. "You're half frozen to death." Sarah tried to answer, tried to explain about the sick child, about the promise she had made, but the words wouldn't come. The world suddenly tilted sideways, colors bleeding together like watercolors in rain. She felt herself falling through space and time and cold, and then there was nothing but darkness and the distant sound of a man's voice calling her name, though she had never told him what it was. When consciousness returned, it came slowly, like sunrise creeping over a reluctant horizon. Warmth enveloped her, real warmth that seemed to seep into her bones and chase away the terrible cold that had been her only companion for so long. She was lying on something soft, covered with blankets that smelled of horses and leather, and something else, something warm and masculine that she couldn't quite identify. Sarah opened her eyes to find herself in a small cabin, firelight dancing across rough-hewn walls and casting everything in shades of gold and amber. The fire crackled in a stone hearth, sending waves of blessed heat across the room. She was on a narrow bed, still fully clothed, but with her boots removed, her feet wrapped in thick wool socks that weren't hers. Her medical bag sat on a wooden table nearby, and beside it, a steaming cup that sent the scent of coffee and something stronger into the air. "You're awake." The voice came from the shadows near the door, and she turned to see the man who had found her. In the firelight, she could see him clearly for the first time. He was perhaps 35, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of winter sky. His face was weathered by sun and wind, marked with lines that spoke of hard work and harder choices. There was something careful about the way he moved, as if he was constantly aware of his own size and strength. "I need to get to the Morrison Ranch," Sarah said, her voice coming out as a croak. She tried to sit up, but dizziness washed over her in waves. "There's a sick child." The man stepped closer, and she could see concern written across his features. "The Morrison place is 15 miles north of here, and this storm isn't letting up any time soon. You wouldn't make it a quarter mile in this weather." He gestured toward the window, where snow continued to fall in thick sheets. "Billy Morrison's fever broke yesterday. I sent my foreman over with medicine." Sarah stared at him, confusion clouding her thoughts. "How did you know? How did you—" "Name's Thomas Hartwell," he said simply, settling into a chair near the fire. "I own the land between here and Morrison's place. When word came down about the boy being sick, I figured someone might try to make the trip in this weather." He studied her face in the firelight. "Didn't expect it to be a woman traveling alone." There was something in the way he said his name, as if it should mean something to her, but Sarah's mind was still clouded with cold and exhaustion. She knew she should be grateful, should thank him for saving her life, but all she could think about was the promise she had failed to keep, the child she hadn't been able to help. "I'm a nurse," she said, as if that explained everything. "Sarah Mitchell. I came out from Boston 2 years ago to help folks who can't afford proper doctors." Thomas nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. "I know who you are. Heard about the woman who rides circuit through the mountains, patching up miners and ranchers for whatever they can pay." He paused, something unreadable crossing his features. "Heard you don't ask questions about a man's past or his politics, just whether he's bleeding." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, though whether from the fire or embarrassment she couldn't say. She had earned a reputation in these mountains, but she hadn't realized it had spread so far. People need help. It doesn't matter where they come from or what they've done. "That's a dangerous way of thinking in this territory," Thomas said quietly. "There's men out there who'd take advantage of that kind of kindness." And there's men who'd risk their own lives to save a stranger in a blizzard," Sarah replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "I suppose it balances out." Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the careful wall he kept around himself. He stood abruptly, moving to the stove where a pot of something savory simmered. "You need to eat something, get your strength back." The next 3 days passed in a strange, suspended reality. The storm raged outside with unrelenting fury, piling snow against the windows and turning the world beyond the cabin walls into an impenetrable white void. Thomas moved through the small space with quiet efficiency, tending the fire, preparing simple meals, checking on Sarah's recovery with the same careful attention he might give a wounded animal. Sarah learned that the cabin was only a line shack, one of several scattered across what Thomas called the South Range. He spoke of the land with casual familiarity, mentioning sections and boundaries as if he knew every ridge and valley by name. But when she asked direct questions about his ranch, about his life, he deflected with the skill of a man who had spent years avoiding unwanted attention. "You never told me how you knew about Billy Morrison," Sarah said on the second evening, watching Thomas bank the fire for the night. "Or how your foreman happened to have medicine." Thomas paused in his work, his hands stilling on the poker. "I keep medical supplies at most of the line shacks. Men get hurt working cattle in country like this." See, it was a reasonable explanation, but something in his tone suggested there was more to the story. Sarah had spent 2 years reading the faces of men in pain, men with secrets, men carrying burdens they couldn't share. She recognized the weight in Thomas's shoulders, the way his eyes would go distant when he thought she wasn't watching. "What happened to you?" she asked softly. He turned to look at her, firelight playing across his features. "What makes you think something happened? You move like a man who's learned to be careful. You watch the windows, listen to every sound outside, and you live alone in a line shack instead of the main house, wherever that might be." Sarah pulled the blanket closer around herself. "I've seen it before in men who've seen too much war, too much violence." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "My brother was murdered 3 years ago. Shot down in broad daylight in front of the bank in Stillwater Creek," his hands clenched into fists. "The man who did it claimed self-defense, said James had been cheating at cards, but James didn't even gamble." Sarah felt her heart clench in sympathy. "I'm sorry." The killer's name was Wade Garrett, son of the territorial judge, nephew to half the ranchers in the valley. Thomas's voice was flat, emotionless, but Sarah could hear the rage burning underneath. The trial lasted 1 day. Jury deliberated for 20 minutes before they declared it justified homicide. "So you left," Sarah said, understanding beginning to dawn. "I tried to kill him," Thomas said simply. "Waited outside the courthouse with a rifle, planning to put a bullet through his head the moment he walked free." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Turns out killing a man in cold blood is harder than it looks, even when he deserves it." Sarah studied his profile in the firelight, seeing the boy he must have been beneath the hard lines of the man he'd become. "What stopped you?" "Fear, maybe. Conscience. The knowledge that James would have hated what I was about to become." Thomas shook his head. "I rode out instead. Came up here to the mountains where a man can disappear if he needs to." "And you've been hiding ever since," Sarah said gently. Thomas turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the fire. "Some would call it hiding. I call it staying alive long enough to figure out what comes next." Daw! The storm finally broke on the 4th day, leaving behind a world transformed by snow and ice that glittered like diamonds in the returning sunlight. Sarah stood at the window, watching the light play across the pristine landscape, feeling strong enough to travel for the first time since Thomas had found her. Her color had returned, along with her appetite and the restless energy that had always driven her from one patient to the next. "The trail should be passable by afternoon," Thomas said from behind her. He was loading supplies into a pack, preparing for the journey back to civilization. "I'll take you as far as Millerville. You can catch the stage from there." Sarah nodded, though something inside her recoiled at the thought of leaving this warm sanctuary, of returning to the loneliness that had become her constant companion over the past 2 years. She had grown accustomed to Thomas's quiet presence, to the comfort of shared meals and evening conversations by the fire. The prospect of going back to her solitary rounds, sleeping in different beds every night, eating whatever charity might be offered, suddenly felt unbearable. "Thomas," she said, turning to face him, "what if you came with me?" He looked up from his packing, confusion clear on his face. "What?" "Come back to town. Stop running from whatever you think you deserve." Sarah moved closer, her heart hammering against her ribs. "There's work for a man like you, honest work. You could start over." Thomas shook his head slowly. "You don't understand. I'm not running from what I deserve. I'm running from what I want to do. Every time I close my eyes, I see Wade Garrett's face. Every time I hear about an injustice, about good people getting hurt while the powerful go unpunished, I feel that rifle in my hands again." "Then use that anger for something good," Sarah said urgently. "Help me help people. Protect the ones who can't protect themselves. Channel that need for justice into something that would make your brother proud." For a moment, something flickered in Thomas's eyes, something that might have been hope, but then the walls came back up, stronger than before. "I'm not a good man, Sarah. The thoughts I carry, the things I've wanted to do. James was the good one. I'm just his shadow." "Roo." Sarah felt tears burn behind her eyes, frustration and something deeper, something she was afraid to name, rising in her chest. "You saved my life. You've spent 4 days taking care of me, asking nothing in return. You sent medicine to a sick child you'd never met. How is that not good?" Thomas finished tying off his pack and shouldered it, his movements sharp with suppressed emotion. "Because none of it changes what I am underneath. None of it changes the fact that I still want to put a bullet through Wade Garrett's head." They made the journey to Millerville in tense silence, Sarah riding behind Thomas on his powerful black horse, her arms wrapped around his waist as they navigated the snow-covered trails. She could feel the rigid tension in his body, the careful distance he was trying to maintain between them. Every mile that passed felt like a door closing, like an opportunity slipping away that would never come again. Millerville was a rough mining town built into the side of a mountain, its streets lined with saloons and gambling halls that never seemed to close. The stage would arrive the next morning, Thomas told her, as he helped her down from the horse outside the boarding house. He would find her a room for the night, make sure she was safe, and then disappear back into the mountains like a ghost. "This is goodbye then," Sarah said, standing on the wooden sidewalk with her medical bag in her hand, feeling more alone than she had ever felt in her life. Thomas touched the brim of his hat, his face a mask of careful politeness. "Take care of yourself, Miss Mitchell. Try not to ride into any more blizzards." He was turning to leave when the sound of breaking glass erupted from the saloon across the street, followed by angry shouts and the crash of overturning furniture. Through the swinging doors, a figure stumbled backward into the street, blood streaming from a gash above his left eye. Behind him came 3 men, one carrying a broken bottle, all of them wearing the kind of expensive clothes that marked them as men of influence. "You worthless piece of garbage," the man with the bottle snarled, advancing on the fallen figure. "You think you can accuse me of cheating? You think anyone in this town is going to believe a broken-down miner over a Garrett?" Sarah felt Thomas go rigid beside her. The name hung in the air between them like a loaded gun. The man on the ground was elderly, grey-haired and thin, wearing the rough clothes of someone who made his living underground. Blood ran down his face as he tried to crawl away from his attackers, but one of them kicked him in the ribs, sending him sprawling face first into the muddy street. "Please," the old man gasped. "I saw what I saw. That card came from your sleeve, not the deck." The man with the bottle laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Even if it did, who's going to do anything about it? My father owns half this territory, and my uncle owns the other half." He raised the broken bottle higher. "Maybe a few more scars will help you remember to keep your mouth shut." Sarah was moving before she fully realized what she was doing, her medical bag in her hand as she stepped into the street. "Stop it! He's hurt badly enough." The 3 men turned to look at her, surprise and amusement warring on their faces. The one with the bottle was young, perhaps 25, with pale eyes and the kind of cruel smile that came from a lifetime of never facing consequences. "Well, well, looks like we have a good Samaritan." His gaze traveled up and down her body with insulting familiarity. "Pretty little thing, too. You a friend of old Pete here?" "I'm a nurse," Sarah said, kneeling beside the injured man and opening her bag. "And this man needs medical attention." "What he needs is to learn some manners," the young man said, but he lowered the bottle slightly. "But I suppose we can postpone his education if you're willing to provide some compensation for our trouble." Sarah's hands stilled in her bag. She looked up at him, seeing the ugly intent in his pale eyes, and felt ice form in her veins that had nothing to do with the cold. Behind her, she could hear footsteps, slow and deliberate, as Thomas stepped into the street. "I think the lady told you to stop," Thomas said, his voice carrying across the space between them with quiet authority. The young man turned, his cruel smile widening. "And who might you be, stranger? Another knight in shining armor?" Thomas moved closer, each step measured and purposeful. Sarah could see something happening in his face, a transformation from the careful, guarded man she had come to know into something harder, more dangerous. Name's Thomas Hartwell, and you're Wade Garrett." The smile slipped from Wade's face as recognition dawned. "Thomas Hartwell, I heard you'd crawled away to die somewhere in the mountains after your brother got what was coming to him." His hand moved to the gun at his hip. "Saves me the trouble of hunting you down." "Funny thing," Thomas said conversationally, still walking forward. "I came to town planning to put a bullet through your head. Spent 3 years thinking about it, dreaming about it." He was close enough now that Sarah could see the deadly calm in his eyes. "But watching you torture an old man in the street, I realized killing you would be too quick, too merciful." Wade's companions were backing away now, sensing the change in the air, the electric tension that preceded violence. But Wade himself seemed rooted in place, his hand frozen on his gun, as Thomas continued his slow advance. "You see, Wade, my brother was twice the man you'll ever be. He was kind, generous, honest, everything you're not." Thomas stopped just out of arm's reach, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "And I just realized that becoming a killer to avenge him would dishonor everything he stood for." Wade's face twisted with rage and confusion. "Then what are you going to do, Hartwell? Walk away like the coward you are?" Thomas smiled, and Sarah felt her blood run cold at the expression. "I'm going to give you exactly what you gave my brother. A fair fight." His hand moved to hover over his own gun. "Unless you'd rather shoot me in the back like you did him." "James drew first," Wade snarled, his composure finally cracking. "It was self-defense." "Then prove it," Thomas said simply. "Draw." What happened next took perhaps 3 seconds, but to Sarah it felt like an eternity stretched thin as wire. Wade's hand flashed toward his gun with desperate speed, his face contorted with fear and rage. But Thomas was faster, his movement so smooth it seemed almost lazy by comparison. His Colt cleared leather and fired in one fluid motion, the sound echoing off the surrounding buildings like thunder. Wade screamed, dropping his weapon as blood bloomed across his right shoulder. He fell to his knees in the mud, clutching the wound, his face gone pale with shock and pain. Thomas holstered his gun and knelt beside the wounded man, his voice calm and conversational. "That was for drawing on an unarmed man 3 years ago. Next time I see you threaten someone weaker than yourself, I'll aim a little lower." He stood, looking down at Wade with cold eyes. "Tell your father that Thomas Hartwell is back. Tell him that his protection doesn't extend to every corner of this territory." As the crowd that had gathered began to disperse and someone went for the doctor, Thomas turned to Sarah. She was still kneeling beside the injured miner, but her eyes were fixed on Thomas's face, searching for something she couldn't name. "Was that justice?" she asked quietly. Thomas considered the question seriously. "It was a start." The old miner, Pete, recovered from his injuries within a week, though the emotional scars ran deeper. He came to thank Thomas before leaving town, pressing a small leather pouch into his hands with tears in his eyes. "It ain't much," he said, "but it's all the gold I've managed to save these past 5 years. Figured a man who'd stand up for someone like me deserves more than words." Thomas tried to give the pouch back, but Pete wouldn't hear of it. "Use it for something good," the old man insisted. "Something that would make this whole mess worth something." That evening, Thomas found Sarah at the boarding house, sitting by the window in the small parlor, reading a book by lamplight. She looked up as he entered, and he could see the question in her eyes that she had been too polite to ask. "I've been thinking about what you said," Thomas began, settling into the chair across from her. "About using anger for something good." Sarah closed her book, giving him her full attention. "And Pete's gold, combined with what I've saved over the past 3 years, would be enough to start something. A clinic, maybe. Somewhere people like him could get help without having to choose between paying a doctor and feeding their families." Sarah felt her heart begin to race. "You're talking about a permanent practice, a real medical facility." "I'm talking about a partnership," Thomas said, his eyes meeting hers across the lamplit space. "You'd run the medical side, I'd handle everything else. Security, supplies, making sure the people who need help can find us." He paused, something vulnerable flickering across his features. making sure no one has to face men like Wade Garrett alone. Sarah set her book aside, her hands trembling slightly. "Thomas, are you asking me to—" "I'm asking you to stay," he said simply. "I'm asking you to help me become the man my brother thought I was, the man you seem to think I could be." The silence stretched between them, filled with possibility and hope and the weight of decisions that would change everything. Outside, the wind whistled through the mountains, carrying the scent of snow and promise. "Yes," Sarah said, the word barely a whisper. "Yes, I'll stay." The smile that spread across Thomas's face was like sunrise after a long night, transforming his features and revealing the man he had been before grief and anger had hollowed him out. He reached across the space between them, taking her hands in his. "There's something else," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Something I should have told you days ago." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "What?" "My full name is Thomas James Hartwell, and my family, we own most of the land between here and Denver, cattle, mining claims, timber rights." He looked down at their joined hands. "I'm not just some drifter, Sarah. I'm one of the wealthiest men in the territory." Sarah stared at him, pieces of the puzzle suddenly falling into place. The easy familiarity with which he spoke of the land, the quality of his clothes and gear, the way he had been able to send medicine to the Morrison Ranch without question. "You own half the county," she breathed. "More like 3/4, Thomas admitted sheepishly. "James and I inherited it from our father. After James died, I couldn't bear to set foot on the home place, couldn't stand to be around all those memories. So I've been living in line shacks, letting the foreman run things while I hid from my responsibilities." Sarah pulled her hands free, standing abruptly and walking to the window. "So when you talk about starting a clinic, you're not talking about some small operation. You're talking about something that could serve the entire region." "If that's what you want," Thomas said, rising to follow her, "we could build a hospital, bring in other doctors, create something that would really make a difference." Sarah turned to face him, tears she couldn't explain burning behind her eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was afraid you'd see me differently. Afraid you'd think I was just another rich man playing at charity." Thomas reached out tentatively, touching her face with gentle fingers. "Everything I told you about my anger, about wanting revenge, about feeling lost, all of that was real. The money doesn't change any of it." Sarah leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. "It changes everything and nothing," she whispered. "It means we can help more people, reach farther, make a real difference. But it also means you have responsibilities you've been running from." "I know," Thomas said, "and I'm ready to face them with you." When Sarah opened her eyes, she found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Thomas, I love you," he said simply. "I think I started falling in love with you the moment I saw you standing in that blizzard, half frozen, but still trying to reach someone who needed help. I love your courage, your compassion, your stubborn refusal to give up on people." Sarah felt tears spill down her cheeks as she reached up to frame his face with her hands. "I love you too. Even when I thought you were just a sad, angry man hiding in the mountains, I loved you." Their kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if they were both afraid the moment might shatter like spun glass. But then Sarah's arms wound around his neck, and Thomas pulled her closer, and the kiss deepened into something that tasted of hope and promise and new beginnings. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "So we'll do this together? Build something worthy of James's memory?" "Together," Sarah agreed. "But I have one condition." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "My real name isn't Sarah Mitchell," she said with a shy smile. "It's Sarah Elizabeth Whitmore. I'm the daughter of a Boston surgeon who disowned me when I refused to marry the man he chose for me." Thomas laughed, the sound rich and warm in the quiet room. "So we're both running from our pasts." "Not running anymore," Sarah corrected. "Moving forward. Together." 2 years later, the Hartwell Medical Center stood as a testament to what love and determination could build. The gleaming white building rose 3 stories from the valley floor, its windows catching the morning sun like beacons of hope. Inside, doctors and nurses moved through halls that hummed with the quiet efficiency of healing. Outside, a steady stream of patients arrived daily, some traveling hundreds of miles for treatment they could afford. Sarah stood at the window of her office on the 3rd floor, watching Thomas work with a group of men, building the foundation for an expansion that would add 50 more beds. He had traded his gun for surveyor's tools and account books, but he still carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had faced his demons and won. Her hand moved unconsciously to the swell of her belly, where their first child grew beneath her heart. They had been married in a simple ceremony in the clinic's chapel, with Pete serving as Thomas's best man and half the territory in attendance. It had been a celebration not just of their love, but of the new beginning they represented. Mrs. Hartwell? The voice belonged to Jenny Martinez, one of the young nurses Sarah had trained. The patient in room 12 is asking for you specifically. Sarah turned from the window, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. What's wrong with him? Frostbite, mostly. He was found half frozen in the mountains by some miners. Says his name is Michael Garrett. Jenny paused, clearly recognizing the name. Says he needs to make amends for something his brother did. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. Through the window, she could see Thomas looking up from his work, alerted by some instinct to her distress. Their eyes met across the distance, and she saw understanding pass between them. "Tell him I'll be right there," Sarah said, her hand moving protectively over her belly, "and ask my husband to join us when he can." As Jenny hurried away, Sarah took a deep breath and squared her shoulders. The past had a way of circling back, she had learned, but it no longer held the power to destroy. They had built something stronger than revenge, something more lasting than anger. Outside, she could hear the sound of hammers and saws, the busy noise of construction and growth. Inside, she could hear the quieter sounds of healing, of lives being mended and hope being restored. And beneath it all, like a steady heartbeat, was the knowledge that some love stories begin in the darkest moments and bloom into something that lights the way for everyone around them. Sarah touched her belly one more time, feeling the flutter of life within, then walked down the hall toward room 12. Whatever came next, she and Thomas would face it together, the way they had faced everything else since that snowy day when a bitter wind brought them both exactly where they needed to be.